Howdy. Let's spend a few minutes talking about oil coolers and piston cooling nozzles. So almost every diesel engine is going to have an oil cooler on it. What's an oil cooler? Well, it's a heat exchanger, no different than your radiator, except that instead of coolant to air, you're doing oil to coolant. You're moving your heat transfer from your oil to your coolant, and then ultimately from your coolant to the air. So why do diesel engines all need a heat exchanger or an oil cooler if gasoline engines don't always have them? Well, it's due to the extreme heat and pressure that diesel engines create. The turbos superheat that oil. There's piston cooling nozzles that are squirting oil right onto the bottom of that piston, trying to cool those things down, therefore absorbing the heat. Oil should never exceed 250 degrees. We're looking at a Series 60 right here. You can see your two lube filters down there, oil filters. This module here, that is your oil cooler. So the oil cooler in a Series 60 is a plate style oil cooler. This is out of a DD15, is a plate style oil cooler. So this oil cooler is either in the block or in some kind of module, coolant to oil module, where you have oil running in through there. You can see in there, if I can get it focused just right, it actually kind of looks like a radiator in there. You've got a bunch of fins running down through each one of these plates. You got an in and an out port. There's your different plates. So each one of these plates has oil flowing through it. There's also tube style. So this would be a tube style. You've got oil flowing through the tubes and coolant that goes between them, or vice versa, depending upon manufacturer of engine. Here's a different style. This is actually an EGR cooler, but it's the exact same principle. This used to be assembled like that. You've got a coolant tube here, a coolant tube there. You had your EGR flow, exhaust gas flow, through there. Same exact deal if this were oil. You would have oil running through those tubes and the coolant coming in these ports running all around them. That coolant is trying to rob that oil of its heat. You don't want that oil to become more than 250 degrees because it then starts to break down and coke on all your parts. Oil should typically be about 30 to 40 degrees hotter than your coolant is. Both systems have thermostats in them. Your cooling system has a thermostat to try and bring your engine up to operating temp that much quicker, because it runs much more efficiently then. Same with your oil. Your oil needs to be warmer so that it becomes less viscous, thinner. It's much more ecologically, as far as the EPA is concerned, economy-wise, friendly when it's thin. So if your oil is above 250 degrees and it starts breaking down, there's a red flag. Do you just immediately say there's a problem with your oil system? Not necessarily. What if your cooling temp is 250 degrees as well? That means your cooling system probably has an issue. So it should be about 30 to 40 degrees hotter, but both of them should be running within certain parameters. So earlier I also mentioned a piston cooling nozzle. Remember, the diesel oil gets hotter than a regular gasoline engine oftentimes because of turbos and because of these little guys, piston cooling nozzles. These are going to bolt in to the bottom side of your block, squirting up your cylinder right at the bottom of the piston. So this is going to try to absorb some of the heat from the piston and lubricate your wrist pin. This is a piston cooling nozzle that has a standard bolt holding it into place, and it's got its tube right there that goes into the oil drilling in the block. You can also have piston cooling nozzles that have a banjo bolt. So they're drilled down and then out the side, so that when you install this bolt into that cooling nozzle, you'd be going through here so oil can flow through that bolt. Before you remove your pistons from your engine, you should always pull these. If you bump into one of these with your connecting rod on your way out, you might tweak this even just 1/8 of an inch or a few millimeters, and all of a sudden that won't be spraying where it needs to. If you lose that lube spray, you can melt down a piston in no time. So if you hit one of these, always replace it. Always pull these before pulling your piston connecting rod assembly out of that cylinder.